Chapter 27 of Red Diamonds by Justin McCarthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Chapter 27. Lovers. Fidelia woke next morning with a sweet, strong sense of happiness. Her first sensation was all of happiness, exquisite happiness. Why was she happy even for that first delightful moment? Surely she had much to trouble her and make her anxious and afraid. The very relationship into which she had allowed herself to be drawn with Japhet Bland was enough to embarrass her and to make her alarmed. The fearful suspicions she had formed about him, and the reckless resolve she had made to discover his secret by her own unaided skill, must have filled her with a sense of tremendous and almost intolerable responsibility. All this came back upon her only too soon, and drenched as with a cold shower her bright warm sense of happiness. But the cause of that first and most grateful feeling was clear. That day Gerald was to see her for the first time since the night on the Embankment. She had not accompanied Lady Scardial on any of her visits to the hospital to see him. Lady Scardial would not hear of such a thing, and Fidelia, impatient as she was, consented to repress her impatience and to honour conventionality that her days might be long in the land. This morning, then, he was to come. They were to be together for the first time after that long and anxious separation. She was to see him again. She had so many things to say to him. Her heart beat quickly, and her eyes lighted with joy. Ah! But then came the thought, there were things about which she must not talk to him. That brought a chilling sensation upon her, the knowledge that there was something which was weighing on her mind, and which she must not tell to Gerald. For a while she was inclined to blame herself keenly, to reproach herself bitterly, because she had allowed Bland to enter into any intimacy of talk with her, because she had allowed herself to be the sharer of his secret, because she had even for a moment listened to his love-making. Then again the poor perplexed girl tried to justify herself to herself. How could she help her suspicions? And was she not justified in trying to find out whether they had reason behind them or not? Already she knew for a certainty that she was right when she suspected or guessed that Professor Bostock was really Japhet Bland, and was she not justified in thinking that that piece of mystery might mean other mysteries in which there might be danger to the life of her lover? Surely a girl was bound to risk something, to risk even misinterpretation, to defend the life of her lover. It might be that Japhet Bland had put on his masquerading disguise because he was in love with her, and that he kept it on now, as he said, to guard her against danger and to discover and punish crime. Such things she had read of in romance, and it might be so. But even if Bland were acting from the highest motives, still his whole theory was wrong, for he put the murder plot upon Red Gundy, and did not know that Red Gundy was Rupert Granton. But she could not believe in any good purpose on Bland's part. At last she settled down to the melancholy conviction that she had got for the moment into a predicament from which she must not even attempt to extricate herself by any bold and decisive stroke. In a vague sort of way she had come to think that Bland was the great danger threatening Gerald Aspen, and that she was putting herself between the danger and her lover. All this, however, cast its shadow over her mind and over her face. She met her lover in the garden where they had met and walked so often. She almost wished that they could have met for the first time in Ranelagh Gardens, but that would not do. They must meet for the first time openly and conventionally in the Culture College. They met at last, and what did they say? "Oh, Gerald," and "Oh, Fidelia," these and nothing more were their first words. Then there was silence, an almost embarrassed silence, the silence of too much emotion, the silence of love that often finds it hopeless to put its feelings into words. But that silence happily does not last long. Speech is soon found, and is usually found to be very eloquent by the ears to which it is addressed, and to which it appeals with a power and a music all its own. The moment Gerald looked into her eyes, he saw that some deep tormenting trouble was in them. Deep down beneath the sparkling surface of her delight at seeing him, he could discover something sad and darkling, as low down among the sands of an eastern stream beneath the sunny ripples one may sometimes see a devouring monster of the water. "Gerald," she said, "you remember what I told you when we last spoke about our love and about our marrying?" "I remember it only too well, dearest," he murmured, still trying to read the mystery in her eyes. "I was wrong then," she said gently, "and I feel as if I had been punished for it since. Oh, I thought of that so often when you were still lying uncertain of life. I have thought so often if you were to die, and to die in the belief that there was any purpose in life so dear to me as to have and hold your love. I know now that my feeling was a wrong one, and that to make you happy, if I could, dear, if I could, was the work and joy of my life, and not the attempt to bring any miserable sinner to justice. Oh, I have cried and prayed over it so often. Now you are back to me again, and you are well, and I think only of pleasing you." He kissed her tenderly. "Dearest Fidelia, your wish and your desire were natural, but I knew even then that they were mistaken, not because of any delay they put on me, but because I knew you had better not find out the truth." "Yes, and I know it now," she said in a low tone. He looked again into her eyes. She nodded with a quiet expression which said as plainly as words could speak, "Oh, yes, I know it all." "Do you really know, Fidelia?" "I know how my father was killed." She put an emphasis on the word "killed," which Gerald could not fail to understand. She had never before spoken of her father as killed. She had always spoken of him as murdered. "Do you know by whom he was killed?" "I do." "Fidelia, who told you this?" "The man who killed him." Gerald did not dare to ask another question, lest he might reveal the real truth to her, who perhaps, he even yet thought, was under some mistake or delusion. She understood easily the reason of his sudden silence. "I know it all, Gerald. Mr. Granton told me the tale with his own lips. It was a duel, it was not a murder. They were driven on to it by another man, and it was Mr. Granton who killed my father." "I knew it," Gerald said sadly. "But why did he tell you this? I hoped to have had it kept a secret from you forever." "Can you not guess why he told me?" "I cannot guess." "Because he heard you in the hospital, in your sleep, in your delirium, talking about me and saying that I would not marry you until you had helped me to find out all about my father's death, and then he came to me and told me all." "Dear old chap, true and generous comrade," Gerald exclaimed in a burst of emotion which he did not even try to repress. "Yes, it was generous, but it was terrible. I want not to see him again, ever, ever. I forgive him, yes, from the bottom of my heart and my soul I forgive him, and I pray that he may be forgiven, but I want never to see him any more. I dread even to see dear, dear Lady Scardale." Then a sudden thought flashed through her. "Gerald, I want you to do something for me, to promise me something." She was abandoning some of her former plans and yielding to her sudden impulse. He smiled a genial smile. "I wonder what it could be," he asked, "that you could ask me and I could refuse to do." "I want you to marry me and take me away from this place, and I want you to let us change our names." "You shall change your name." No, don't talk lightly about this. I am terribly in earnest, Gerald." "Dearest, I see that you are." "I want you to take me away to some quiet, far-off place where no one knows us, and to change our names and call ourselves something very commonplace, Smith or Jones or something, and live a happy, quiet life, all safe and sheltered from danger." "Danger, dearest Fidelia, danger? What danger?" "What danger? Such danger as you were in the other night on the embankment. Was not that danger?" "But you see I have escaped." "For once, yes, but the next time, the third time, any number of times, can you always escape? Danger is in the very air around us, in this very place where we are now standing." "Fidelia," he said earnestly, and drawing her face towards him while he gazed into her eyes, "you have some meaning in all this. You are not a girl to talk vaguely and wildly. Besides, I saw it in your eyes the first moment I looked at you, that you had something on your mind. Tell me what it is, dearest. Tell me why you talk of danger being in this very place where we are standing now." "I cannot tell. I dare not tell," she exclaimed piteously. "Cannot tell? Not even to me?" "Oh, no, no, you must trust me in this, Gerald, for a little while. I will tell you all when we are away and safe. But not now, dearest, not now. You must trust me." She looked imploringly into his eyes. "Trust you?" he answered. "Why, of course I will trust you. If you want me to ask you no questions, of course I will ask you none. You shall tell me whatever you have to tell me when you can." "Dearest Gerald, how generous you are! A moment ago I was almost miserable, and now you have made me happy." "If trusting you can make you happy, Fidelia, you shall never have an unhappy hour with me." "Then you will come away?" she asked impatiently. "Come away? Where?" "Anywhere out of this, out of London. Let us be married, in private somewhere, in secret anyhow, and then go quietly away and hide ourselves until all this is over." "But, Fidelia, do you want to go away and leave Lady Scardale in utter ignorance of where we have gone or why?" "Couldn't we write her a letter and tell her to trust us? Tell her that we had a motive in everything we did, and that perhaps sometime we shall tell her all. No, we could never tell her all. We could never tell her that her brother-in-law killed my father, but we could tell her all that concerns ourselves. After a while, after a long time. She will trust in us. I know her," poor Fidelia said proudly. "She knows me, and now she knows you, Gerald." "Still, All that mystery and all that sudden secret stampede into the wild regions of the unknown would give her immense pain, and I don't think I am wrong when I say that to lose your companionship would be a cruel blow to her. Do you know that I think at first she did not very much like me, because she saw that I was coming here in the hope of marrying you?" Fidelia looked up with a start and a sort of shudder. She was wondering whether he knew what Lady Scardale's desire had been for her, that she should be married to Rupert Granton. She would not have minded in the least his knowing it, but what she dreaded was lest, not knowing it or knowing it, he should say anything about it, and so bring her name even for a moment into companionship with that of the man who had killed her father. Gerald easily saw into the depth of her feelings this time. He had known well enough of Lady Scardale's intentions, but then he also knew the true story of the duel. Now he was thinking more of something else. He really was greatly perplexed and bewildered by Fidelia's unexpected, unexplained terror, and by her passionate thirst for a flight into a safe obscurity. "Come," she said impatiently, "you must promise me this. You must let me have my way for this once. Don't be afraid, Gerald. I shall be a most obedient and unexacting wife. But now you must let me have my way in this. You will you not?" "But Fidelia, dearest, you must be reasonable." "When we are married, yes," she answered with a faint smile. "If you will only let me unreasonable now." "But tell me, why should we be married secretly and then change our names and hide ourselves in obscurity? What have we done, dearest, that we should conceal ourselves like that?" Many a good girl who was not Fidelia, and who had the same purpose in her mind, would have turned upon her lover and declared that he did not really love her, since he would not grant her first request, and would have burst into tears, and so tried to carry him by storm. Fidelia, to do her justice, was above that device in all her agitation. She knew that to a man she must seem unreasonable, and she would rather have won by reason. "Because of the danger," she said. "There is a danger. There will be another attempt made on you, and what if it should succeed? The other day Captain Raven was here, and he said he expects to be the object of the next attack. Yes, he did, and he is a man who has plenty of courage, but he said it was all a plot to get rid of some of the heirs of this wretched money." "And he is going to change his name and bury himself in some obscure hole?" "Well, he didn't say so, I admit. In fact, he talked quite carelessly about it." "Then, Fidelia, why should I go away? Do you want me to show that I have less courage than Captain Raven?" "No," she answered slowly, "but perhaps he too may be persuaded to be unreasonable. Captain Raven will be guided, perhaps, by Lydia, and you have me." She looked so charmingly childlike, innocent and loving, with her lips quivering and her eyes moist, that Gerald felt touched to the very heart, with pathos, with pain, with passionate love. Still he strove to be reasonable. "Come now," he argued, "suppose there is this murder plot going on, would it be right for me, of all men, to run away from it, and save myself from personal danger, and take no further part in trying to find out all about it? It is different with Raven, supposing he runs away, which I don't think one bit likely. I, who was almost the first witness of its existence on the night when poor Seth Chickering trusted me with his pocket-book and his diamonds, would you like me to run away in such a manner, and leave poor Raven perhaps to be murdered? And what would be the good of our going away just now? We should have to come back in January and claim our share of the money, and in the meantime— But I wouldn't claim it. What do we care about it? We can be happy without it. You have talents and you can write, and a man who can write can make a living anywhere. Gerald could hardly help smiling. What he had ever known or heard or read concerning the literary market did not seem to him quite to fall in with his roseate assumption of the facilities it puts within the reach of every man who can write. Still, he did not particularly care to argue that point at such a moment. Fidelia went on. "I shan't be a very expensive wife to you, Gerald, you know. I can do without new gowns, and I have a lot of things already, things that will last for years, And what does all that matter as long as people are happy?" Gerald was inspired by a happy device. "But you know," he said, "that if we announced ourselves in January and got our share of the money, there would be no further motive in murdering us." Fidelia caught triumphantly at the idea. "Very well, let it be so. Let us be married publicly, if you like, and announce that we have gone upon the continent, anywhere, and let us go to some unknown place and live under different names until the 1st of January. Come, that isn't much to ask of one's future husband, is it?" "But, my sweet Fidelia, do you think that an organized band of murderers would have the slightest difficulty in tracking out our whereabouts under our assumed name? Why, the more quiet and obscure our hiding place, the more easy it would be for them to find us if they wanted to do so. And look here, Fidelia, do you honestly mean to tell me that you really believe you are a girl of such commonplace appearance that nobody would ever notice you anywhere, and that you might pass for anybody else?" Poor Fidelia, in all her alarm and unhappiness, showed by a slight flush on her cheeks that she was not insensible to this little compliment on the part of her lover. "Oh, but I could do something, cut off my hair and put on blue spectacles, anything." "And what am I to do? Get a wig, put on green spectacles? Good heavens, what a pair of spectacles we should be!" Fidelia could not help giving way to a little spurt of laughter. Then at once she became serious again, feeling as if she were deserting her cause when she yielded for one moment to an impulse of levity. "You will not take this seriously, Gerald?" "Dearest, you can hardly take it seriously yourself." "Not take it seriously? Your life, Gerald! Do you not know that it is still in danger?" "Listen, Fidelia, I don't want to make too little of all this, if I don't want to make too much of it. There was evidently a great danger, and I have no doubt that there was a murder plot, but you see how it has been blown upon, and the police must by this time have the threads of the whole conspiracy in their hands. For myself, I am satisfied that, if there is any such plot, the man with the red beard, whoever he is only the mere instrument in the working of it, and that the master criminal is this fellow, Japhet Bland, who has never put in any appearance at all. If once we could get hold of that man, we should have the key of the whole business, and depend upon it he will be got hold of. Either he will have to drop his plans altogether, or he will be got hold of. I wonder if he is in London." Fidelia started and flushed so obviously that Gerald could not fail to see her embarrassment and alarm. "Then he is in London, Fidelia, and you know it?" "Gerald, you told me just a moment ago that you would not ask me any questions. You told me you would trust me, that you would believe in me. Are you going to break your promise?" "You know I am not," he answered gravely. "But you seem distressed, you seem disturbed, you seem distrustful. Is it in this sort of way we are to meet for the first time since your life was in danger? Oh, if you knew how I lay awake of nights, and thought of you, and prayed for you, and longed to see you, and how I looked out for this day to be one of the very happiest days of all my life, a day to be remembered for ever, and now see—" "Fidelia," Gerald said, "I dare say I should be blamed by many a wise person for yielding to you in this, but I trust you absolutely, and I know you deserve the trust. It is a little of a shock at first to find that you know something which you have kept from me." "For the present, only for the present," she interrupted imploringly. "For the present, yes, even for the present. I wish it were not so. I wish you had no secret from me, even for a moment." "Oh, and so do I!" the girl exclaimed passionately. "I wish now I had never been drawn into any sort of secrecy, but I could not help it, and I did it for the best, for I know there is danger to you, and I believe, yes I do, that I can still save you from it. Gerald, for this time, this first time, this last time, let me have my way." Gerald was deeply perturbed and distressed, but he could not doubt her love, and he knew well how keen and quick was her intelligence, and he knew as well that she had, for all her womanly emotions and impulses and effusiveness, an almost masculine faculty of reason. He felt that he could not but trust her. So he kissed her tenderly. "Do as you will, my Fidelia," he said. "You shall have my full trust and confidence to the end. I shall ask you nothing now or after, until the time comes when you feel that you ought to tell me. I can wait." She began to reassume her courage again. She smiled a sort of wintry smile, and pressed his hand, and said, "When I was a little girl, Gerald, I read a story which at that time used to chill my blood. It was a story about a young wife. She was lying away one night while her husband was sleeping. Suddenly, a man with a mask on came into her room. A faint light was burning. He had a pistol in his hand, and the moment he opened the door his eyes caught hers, and they understood each other. Then he said, in the quietest little whisper, that he had other men outside, that he meant to have her jewels and everything of value he could, that if she lay perfectly quiet no harm should happen to anyone, but if she roused her husband he would kill him that moment. So she made up her mind at once. She said nothing, she lay absolutely still, she even assumed the deep, quiet breathing of sleep." Fidelia paused. "Go on, dearest. This interests me because it interested you when you were a child." "Interested? Oh, it used to thrill me with a fearful fascination, and to horrify me all the time. Well, but think of her feelings, trying to keep everything quiet, trying to keep her husband from being disturbed, while the robber was ransacking the room. At last the work was done, and the robber silently went away with his spoil. She did not awaken her husband even then, but let him sleep for hours, until the robbers should be quite safe out of reach. Then she roused him and told him." "And he scolded her, I dare say," Gerald said, smiling. "I don't know. I shouldn't have cared much if I were she. I should know that I had saved him, and that would be enough for me." "Yes," Gerald said, "and you feel that you are like her now." "I feel that I am like her now," Fidelia said tenderly. "Yes, I used to talk over the story to girls in those days, and some of them said she was wrong, and that she was a coward, and that she ought to have wakened up her husband and let him fight the robber. But I only thought that she had saved her husband, saved him and kept him for her and her love, and I could no more care what became of the robber than I could have cared what became of the diamonds. There, Gerald, you have my story. Don't ask me for anything more now." "I understand something of the meaning of your parable in a vague sort of way, Fidelia. I shan't ask you for anything more." "Thank you, dearest Gerald. I knew how you would act. I knew it well because you trust me as I trust you. Now let us talk of other things." So they talked of other things, of many other things. They rambled all over the garden, and they planned for a next meeting the following day, and it was as good as settled that they were to be married publicly very soon. Publicly, that is to say, in the sense that there was to be no secrecy or mystery about it, but in every other sense privately and quietly, and that the rest was to take care of itself. Fidelia did not for the moment press any further the idea of the escape into anonymous obscurity. She thought she would let things develop a little before she finally made up her mind to insist upon that. If it were needed as a last resource, she would not hesitate to urge it upon Gerald, and she had good hope now that she could prevail with him. She intended that everything about the marriage should be kept very private until the day came. Was she afraid of some desperate deed of violence by Japhet Bland on the very day of the marriage, if he came to know of it in time? Perhaps there was a risk. No doubt there was a risk. But something must be risked, and she was not without a hope that in the meantime she might be able to work on the fears or the selfishness or the cautious craft of Japhet Bland. All this was coursing through her mind even while she was talking with her lover. "Now, Gerald, dearest," she suddenly said, "we must go and see Lady Scardale. We must indeed. We shall seem so horribly egoistic and thinking about our own selves and our own happiness and nothing else. And we are not that, dearest. No, we are not that." So they went and saw Lady Scardale and told her about their plans, as far as they could tell them, and Lady Scardale approved cordially, setting down all the privacy to her account of Fidelia's tender memory of her father, and her natural unwillingness to have any sort of showy wedding ceremonial. And Professor Bostock, practising with his foils in the saloon, saw the three passing the window, and noted how their faces were bowed together in hushed talk, and how Fidelia's eyes drooped, and how proud was the look on Gerald's face. And Bostock read the whole story as plainly as if it had been put into print for his understanding. And he thought within himself that perhaps he could spoil some of their plans even yet. Gerald went away happy, proud, yet perplexed. He had the utmost confidence in Fidelia, and was sure that whatever she did was done for the best. He had full confidence even in her judgment, but still the air was too thick with the mystery for him, and he hated to be in darkness, and yet to know that danger was coming. It was like being in some narrow tunnel with hardly a gleam of light, and with the knowledge that a train must soon rush along on this side or that. Let us do him justice, however. Uppermost in his mind was the happiness he felt in the knowledge that Fidelia and he were soon to be married. Perhaps this great objection to the idea of the danger was that he was not allowed to take his part in it. Must I only be a special correspondent even in the affairs of my own life? He asked of himself, half in jest, half in earnest, as he left the College of Culture. And only report what has happened when the struggle is over, and never be allowed to go to the front and take a hand in the battle? He went on to the Voyagers' Club and smoked and thought. He avoided talking to men, and always kept a foreign newspaper open in his hand, on which he affected to be deeply intent. "Copy, old man," said a friendly brother journalist who passed him. Copy, meaning the written matter which is supplied to the press for printing, the implication to the brother journalist in this case being that Gerald was looking through the foreign paper to find materials to write about, and would therefore rather not be disturbed. "Copy? Oh yes," Gerald answered. "Always copy, copy, shower of frogs, enormous gooseberry, you know." These, too, are ancient jokes among the craft of journalism, the assumption that men still concoct for the papers in the silly season the story of a shower of frogs descending somewhere, or of a gooseberry which might be called the Leviathan of fruit. Thus Gerald got free of his friend, and went back to his thoughts, his perplexities, his vague fears, his happiness, and his strong love. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Red Diamonds by Justin McCarthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Chapter 28. A Night Attack. Rupert Granton came to the Culture College that same evening, after Gerald Aspen had left. He had not particularly desired to see Fidelia, but he found her with Lady Scardale in one of Lady Scardale's rooms, and the man would have been dull indeed who did not know by the looks of the two women, by their affectionate clinging to each other, that something had happened which filled their minds. When he entered, Lady Scardale was seated with her arm around Fidelia's waist, holding the girl tenderly to her. The coming of Rupert disturbed this little arrangement, and Fidelia drew away and blushed a good deal. Instinct told Rupert what it was all about. "You must congratulate her, Rupert dear," Lady Scardale said. "I am so glad you have come in good time to do it. Why don't you shake hands, you two, I want to know?" she asked, in the sweetest tone of remonstrance. She knew full well what Rupert felt towards Fidelia, and she wished to break things gently to him, and to show him that he must take things lightly, at least in appearance, and assume to Fidelia the manner of a friend to his friend. Fidelia hung back a little confused. She somehow wished that she had not been present when the news was told to Rupert. And then she never could take his hand without a hesitancy and a cold tremor. She had forced herself to do it, but it was always a pain and grief, and a renewal of old grief to her. For that hand had killed her father. Rupert hung back too, well knowing what must be in the girl's mind. Each, however, well knew the severe necessity there was for keeping Lady Scardale ignorant of that which was within their knowledge. Lady Scardale misinterpreted the feelings of both. "She's going to be married, Rupert," she said, "to Mr. Aspen," and she looked into his face sympathetically. "Take her hand and wish her joy." Rupert moved towards Fidelia. She advanced to him. He kept his eyes averted. The window was open. It was a soft evening of early autumn, and the exquisite breath of the flowers was borne into the room. At that moment Rupert saw Professor Bostock standing on the path outside the window, and looking keenly into the room. Neither Lady Scardale nor Fidelia could have seen him from where Lady Scardale sat and Fidelia was standing. Granton took Fidelia's hand. It felt as cold as marble, and he lifted his eyes to hers and wished her joy. Oh, how sincerely he wished it! How he loved her all the time! How he saw in a moment all his past life come back upon him, and that one hateful scene, the memory of which made him reluctant to touch that girl's cold hand. How he lamented for his wasted youth, and wished that he had led another life! It seemed him for the moment as if tears were coming into his eyes. He, the outcast of aristocracy, the purposeless wanderer, the social exile, the world's tramp, the rowdy of New York and New Orleans, and Vera Cruz and Brazil, and Chile and Asia and South Africa. He felt his eyes growing moist because he wished in his heart for the happiness, with another man, of the girl he loved and whom he was soon to see for the last time. All this passed in a second, in a flash, and as he dropped Fidelia's hand and his eyes left hers, he glanced at the window and was aware that Professor Bostock was still there. Then Bostock gave one rapid look into the room again, with a sudden flame in his eyes, and turned away. In that instant Granton had formed a theory. That glance from those eyes had been as a revelation to him. He did not stay long. He told his sister-in-law privately that he would probably come back later in the evening. He wanted to talk to her about 2 or 3 things, he said carelessly. Lady Scardale assumed that he wished to ask her some questions about the approaching marriage, and she was anxious to speak to him quietly about it. So he went away, and late that evening, after Fidelia had gone to her own room for the night, he returned. But to Lady Scardale's surprise he did not speak about Fidelia or Aspin or the marriage. She respected his feelings and said not a word on the subject. He talked about all manner of other things, and asked her 2 or 3 questions about her first knowledge of Professor Bostock. It was growing late for that early place, and Lady Scardale asked him if he would not stay for the night. He often did thus stay. He assented very readily, on condition that he might yet lounge about the grounds for a while and smoke his cigar. Lady Scardale gave her ready assent, and she presently gave him a kiss, and also the latch-key for one of the doors, admonished him not to stay up too late, and left him to himself. She could easily understand, she thought, why he should wish to be left to himself. He would want to indulge himself in lonely thinking over the coming marriage of the girl he loved, and who was not to be married to him. Rupert wandered about the grounds, smoking and thinking. He wandered about, purposeless as a ghost. He was going away for ever very soon, and it soothed his melancholy fancy to wander about the place alone, and at night, for the last time. But he was thinking also of the mystery that had hung over the lives of so many people this time back, ever since he returned to London, and he was thinking of the revelation which he seemed to have caught from that one flash of Bostock's eyes. He had always noticed how heavy and how blank of all expression Bostock's eyes habitually were. He even remembered how, on the day of the fencing match and the unbaited foil, Bostock, amid all the surrounding excitement, had preserved that beamless look in his eyes. Then, of course, Bostock knew that other eyes were on his, but this evening, when for a moment he doubtless supposed himself unseen, the eyes flashed and filled with lightning. "I have seen those blazing eyes before," Rupert told himself again and again. "Where did I see them?" Full of those thoughts, some melancholy, some penitent for the past, some suddenly troubled and anxious about the present and the future, he wandered through the grounds, and at last came to a little clump of trees on a patch of lawn, which he knew were under and just opposite Fidelia's window, and there he lingered a while. There was a light in her window. He watched it idly, purposelessly, felt as if he could not get himself away from the spot. "How confoundedly I am in love with her," he said, half jesting with himself and his own emotions. "At my time and after all my experience." Fidelia had no thought of going to bed just yet. She was not inclined for sleep. The events of recent days had kept her always on the strain and stretch of anxiety, and this day her mind had been especially strained. The secrets she was keeping were growing too much for her, were becoming irrepressible as the knowledge of the Pythoness. Yet for the moment she must keep something even from Gerald, and she would have to keep something always from Lady Scardale. When she and Gerald were married and were safely away from England and quiet in some obscure place, then, but not till then, she would tell him all. Before that time she did not dare to speak. Nothing, she felt sure, not even his love for her, would prevent him from following up the clue to the crimes which it was in her power to give him, and she told herself in heart-sickening conviction over and over again that his very first move would be the signal for his death. Oh, how she hated the money which had been the cause of all this crime in some and suffering in others. If Gerald would only consent to come away, then she thought she would be able to keep him with her until the danger was over, until the mystery of the murder plot was unravelled and the murderer held fast by justice. Then she sometimes thought how would it be if Blanche, driven to despair by some premature movement on Gerald's part, were to turn upon her and kill her? How would it be with poor Gerald? The thought of her own death made her tremble and shudder, and brought tears into her eyes, not on her own account, but because Gerald would be so lonely. And Blanche would be capable of that, or of anything, she thought. In truth, Fidelia's love for Gerald was making her timid, was making her almost cowardly. Come an actual and present crisis, and her soul and sense would surely rally, but with the dark shadow of a vague danger over her, and a danger about which she must not seek for sympathy or counsel, her nerves gave way, and she felt as if some paralyzing poison were doing its cruel, creeping work within her. She tried to read, but she could not fix her attention on any book. It is a sad thing for authors to know, but it is a very true thing, that a very little personal trouble or anxiety makes even one's favourite book sometimes an intolerable companion. Then Fidelia fell back upon her own artistic resources. She was fond of writing versicles and setting them to music. She had a gift for versicles, but no inspiration for longer and more pretentious poems. She liked one thought expressed into a song and lifted on the wings of music. A little song which she had lately composed and set to music came up into her mind, and somehow or other it seemed to her to speak of her own perplexities just now, and she sang it, or crooned it, in a low, sweet voice, all to herself. Her voice was not strong, but it had infinite beauty of tender tone, refined and delicate shading of expression. All the soul of feeling seemed to fill it and make it intense. This was Fidelia's song, sung for no ears but hers, audible by no ears but hers. Ah, wherefore smile when we so oft must weep? And why rejoice when we must know regret, or lose ourselves in dreams when after sleep we wake to muse on all we would forget? Why must we live when life is but to live? Why prize these few poor years of mortal breath, since all that time and fate at last can give is the unlonged-for mystery of death? The words answered to her thoughts just now. In the end, what else? If Gerald were to die, if she were to die. She sang her little song more than once, and then she stood up and said to herself that she would shake off all morbid fears and fantasies, and meet the perplexities and the dangers of life with hope and with a strong heart. But the tone of the song had strengthened her in reality, even though she did not know it all the time. The sense of the reality of death is a tonic always. She went to her window and opened it, and stood on the balcony. Her room had a very pretty balcony of delicate and graceful ironwork, and close by the balcony there grew a tall tree. Fidelia had long loved that balcony and that tree. Just now it came into her head, in an odd sort of way, that if she only were a schoolgirl again, and not a personage who had to support the dignity of grown-up womanhood and long skirts, she could easily climb from her balcony into the boughs of that tree, and rock herself among the branches, and look up to the moon, and be cradled in romance and poetry. She almost felt a wild longing to scramble into the tree from the railing of the balcony, but she crushed down that wild desire, unworthy of and indeed wholly unsuited to the dignity of long dresses. So she contented herself with watching the swaying motion of the darkling boughs, and listening to their melancholy music, and then looking up to the voyage of the moon among the cloud islands of the sky. After a while she came back into her room, leaving her window still open, and she sat in an armchair and began to think over things again. She had resolved that she would not go to bed until she felt sleepy, and that for the present she was certain to keep broad awake. Having settled into her chair with that resolve and that understanding, she straightway fell asleep where she sat. How long did she sleep? Some hours, it seemed to her. When she woke up, it was in reality only a few minutes. She was awakened by a curious rustling, creaking sound just outside her window. She jumped up and instinctively ran to the window to close it. She could not tell why, and then she became aware of a dark form between her and the sky. Then a man scrambled from the tree into the balcony. All the tales she had ever heard about midnight robbers rushed topsy-turvy into Fidelia's mind, but even then she was trying to resolve that she would not get into a panic. It was too late to close the window. The man, whoever he might be, was already in the balcony. "Don't be frightened," he said, in a too well-known voice. "It is a friend who comes, and not an enemy, Miss Locke." It was Professor Bostock, Japhet Bland. Fidelia drew back. He entered the room. "Professor Bostock, here at this hour! How did you get in? Why have you come here?" "I got in," he said, "by the tree, and the balcony and the open window. It was not a very difficult feat. "The getting out again," she said, "will be even less difficult, for you can pass out by that door." She moved towards the door to unlock it. He suddenly got between the door and her. "Stay a moment, Miss Locke. Don't be in a hurry. Don't be alarmed." "Alarmed? I am not the least in the world alarmed. What is there to be alarmed at?" "Truly nothing," he said grimly, "if you will only listen to me." "I am not alarmed, and I don't mean to make any conditions. Pray allow me to open that door." "Suppose I don't allow you to open it. What then?" "Then I shall assume that you are going mad." "And suppose I am going mad, what then?" "Then I shall ring for assistance, for your sake as well as mine." "For my sake? I am glad to hear you say for my sake." "Because if you are going mad, and your being here in this sort of way looks very like it, you ought to be looked after." She made another effort to reach the door. He still kept between her and it, with a rigid smile on his face. "You need not trouble about me," he said. "I am not in the least mad, in the medical doctor's sense of the word, or that of the master in lunacy. I am quite sane, except for my love of you." "Oh!" she exclaimed, "this is too much." "You will have to listen to a great deal more before I leave you, Fidelia." "I told you not to call me Fidelia," she said energetically, and she tried again to get past him and to open the door or reach the bell. "I will not let you pass," he said. "I have things to tell you that must be told. I know that you are going to marry that young penny-a-liner Aspen." Fidelia felt her anger growing beyond her fear. "If Mr. Aspen were within hearing," she said, "you would not dare to insult him." Bland paid no attention to her words. "I learned that today," he said, "when I saw you and him and Lady Scardale communing and taking counsel together. No one told me. I can read things without a book. I learned something else today as well. Now at least I have found out also who and where Red Gundy is." Fidelia's very natural start told the keen fencing master at once that he had touched her. "He was here today," Bland went on. "I knew it the moment I saw the aristocratic Mr. Rupert Granton put out his hand to take yours. I saw the pitiful, beseeching sort of way in which he approached you, and the way you shrank from him, and the look of wonder in Lady Scardale's eyes, and I saw the sudden way in which you two hastened to perform the business of clasping hands. Then a light broke in on me. I had had my vague suspicions and conjectures, but this was a revelation. And so, Fidelia, Lady Scardale's brother-in-law is the man who killed your father. What a piece of news to tell her! What a hold that gives me!" "On him? He would defy you. He has told me the truth." "Oh, he has told you? Has he told her?" "Then the hold you hope to get is on that most sweet lady. You are a gallant gentleman, Mr. Japhet Bland." "No, not on her. What do I care about her? On you, on your feelings for her. Fidelia, for the sake of her feelings, you will have to trade with me." "Not even for her," Fidelia said. "She would despise me if I stooped to any compromise for one moment with you. Let me pass through the door, or it will be worse for you in the end." If Fidelia could only have known that faithful eyes were watching her window at that very moment, she might have been brave indeed. But she was brave, although she did not know that any help was near. Yet, though she showed no fear, and though indeed she felt her courage quite equal to whatever the occasion might demand, she could not but see from Bland's face that he was determined, and that he would not allow her to open the door or ring the bell. She well knew that he was a strong and an active man, and that she would be but as a child in his hands. One curious thought ran through her at the moment. If Rupert Granton were there, Granton would be able to fling Bland through the open window. She did not wish her lover there even to protect her. She would have dreaded a meeting at such a time between him and Bland. If she could only have known. "Professor Bostock," she said quietly, "it is not like you to do a thing of this kind, to thrust your way suddenly into a girl's room at night and insist that she must talk to you. I will not talk to you." "What can you do?" "I will open the door and go out, or I will ring the bell until somebody comes." "If I allow you to do one or the other." "You will not prevent me by force." "I will," he answered fiercely. "I will not hurt you, Fidelia, unless I am driven to it, but I will hold you in my arms as if you were a child, just a little child." "Suppose I cry out?" "Then," he answered sternly, "I have two courses open to me. I will kill you, or I will say you invited me to your room." Fidelia turned on him a look of fierce contempt. She even laughed. "Say anything you like," she said. "Who would believe you in this house or anywhere else?" "I will tell," he said, "that you have long known me to be Japhet Bland, and that you have kept my secret from everyone, and I will tell that I wanted you to marry me, and that you kept that a secret too, and I will say that you invited me to your room to talk over things, here, tonight, and why should they not believe that?" "Let us try," she said scornfully. "We shall soon see whether there is anyone in this house who will for one single moment refuse to believe my word. Let me pass." "Why need we be enemies?" he said, still keeping her from her purpose. She would have made a rush at the door but for the mere physical reason that she shrank from the thought of being grasped and held in his arms. "You and I must always be enemies now," she said, passionately. "Why must we? I love you madly. Yes, in that way I am a sort of madman, as dangerous as any madman. I am determined to get you to marry me, Fidelia, by fair means or foul. Don't you see that, this very night, the mere fact of my being found here may be the means of securing my end? Why, the finger of scorn will point at you if this gets out." "You coward! To try and frighten a woman in that way! But you don't frighten me." "What about your lover, Mr. Gerald Aspen? What would he say to such a story, I wonder?" "He would say what I say, that you are a coward and a liar, and I tell you something more, Mr. Japhet Bland. You are a murderer. I have suspected you this long time. I have known you at last. I only allowed you to speak to me in order that I might get at your secret. There, let me go or kill me if you like." "I would rather kill you than let him marry you. What I did to him I did because I loved you, and because I was determined that he should not marry you. That is one thing I came to tell you here this night. Marry me, and come away with me, and that man shall be safe forever, and may get his money and write for his papers, and find out some pretty, commonplace girl, such as English nature turns out by the dozen, who will suit him nicely and can chronicle small beer and suckle fools for him. I am not that sort of man. I have never loved any woman but you, and if I do not marry you, I will take good care that no one else shall do it. You have never had to deal with a man like me before, Fidelia. You must make terms with me. I am a desperate man." "Then I am a desperate woman," she replied. "I will make no terms with you. Kill me if you like. You can't make me not hate you, and you can't make me afraid of you. Hush, listen! There are footsteps, there are voices. People are coming, oh, thank God!" And then she sent pealing out scream after scream for help. For a moment, a second, she believed that he would kill her. His eyes blazed with passion, and he seemed to be searching for a weapon, but already there was a knocking at the door, and 2 voices called on Fidelia, and the moment was gone, and the mood of the wretched man gave way, and he knew too well in his own heart that as he had hesitated for an instant to keep his word and to kill her, it was all over now. He let her go. "Open the door," he said, "and tell them just as much or just as little as you like." She unlocked the door, and Lady Scardale and Rupert Granton hurried into the room. "Save me from this man!" she cried, her self-control all gone. Rupert sprang at Bland and struck him a fierce blow right between the eyes, and Bland went down in a heap on the floor. Take care, Fidelia exclaimed. "He is capable of murder." Rupert stood with perfect composure awaiting an attack, but Professor Bostock gathered himself up quickly and made no attempt to retaliate. "I don't fight before women," he said. "I saw you stab before women," Granton replied. "That fencing bout, don't you remember?" "Tell me all about this, Fidelia," Lady Scardale said. She had been trying to soothe and encourage the poor shaken girl. "Rupert, dear, please keep yourself under control and never mind that man. We shall come to deal with him presently. Tell us all, Fidelia. Stay here, Mr. Bostock." "No, I think I had better go," Bland said, resuming now all the stolid coldness of his habitual manner. "I don't see that I am wanted here just now." "How did you come here?" Lady Scardale asked indignantly. "How did you dare to come here and thrust yourself at such an hour on this young lady?" "We had many fencing lessons together," he answered, "and I thought I should like her to have one more." Granton moved impetuously. Lady Scardale put her hand on him and restrained him. Lady Scardale was simple-minded for all her intelligence and her culture, and she did not understand Bland's metaphorical allusion. "A fencing lesson at 11 o'clock at night," she said in actual wonder. "What do you mean, Mr. Bostock?" "I thought I could teach Miss Locke something she ought to know, about some people she ought to know," Bland said, and with a fierce look at Granton. "Some people against whom she ought to defend herself. I meant her no offence and no harm, but only good if she could have seen it." "He did not offend me," Fidelia hastened to say, dreading any further scene, "except by coming in and refusing to go away when I told him he must go." "Offence enough," Granton said. "Yes, certainly offence enough," Lady Scardale echoed. "Mr. Bostock, I think you must be going out of your senses." "I was going out of my senses. I am coming back to them now." "How did you come so quickly?" Fidelia asked of Lady Scardale. You came before I cried out." "Rupert knocked at my door and called me. He said he had been wandering about the grounds and he saw someone climb into your balcony, and he thought it better to come and tell me than to climb up himself and perhaps put you to a new alarm." "I saw who it was," Rupert said coolly, "and I thought, Miss Locke, that you would rather I brought my sister-in-law with me. Otherwise I could have got in at the window in a moment, but I thought you wouldn't care for such an intrusion, and a row in your room perhaps, and although I was tempted to take the summary process, I felt sure I had better bring Lady Scardale along." "I am glad you are all so happy and loving," Bland said with a sneer. "I shan't disturb all the happiness just now. I may perhaps another time. At present I don't care so much to stay." He was quite cool now, and his pale face, pale save where the blow of Granton's hand had left an angry red mark, was quite unmoved. "Good night, Miss Locke. I am sorry if I alarmed you. There are other things I am sorrier for than that. Good night, Lady Scardale. I suppose you will scarcely expect me tomorrow?" "I hope I shall never see you again, Mr. Bostock," Lady Scardale said with all sincerity. "Don't call him Bostock," Granton broke in. "His name isn't Bostock. His name is—" "Stop," Bostock said, and he said it so sternly that Granton did pause. "Mr. Granton, we have both borne names that were not our own. Shall I tell your other name?" "Oh, hush!" Fidelia interposed. Bostock smiled. "Perhaps for the present we may keep our knowledge to ourselves," he said. "It may interest these ladies some day." Granton looked at him with much amazement and some admiration for his coolness. Bostock drew near to Granton. "May I speak a word or two with you outside?" he said in a low tone, but not so low as to prevent Fidelia from catching the sound and the meaning of the words. She turned from Lady Scardale and towards Granton. "Do not go with him! Do not go with him, I entreat you!" she said. Bostock looked back at her with a something almost like a smile upon his face. "There is nothing to be alarmed at, Miss Locke, I assure you," he said. "I am quite tame at present, but of course if Mr. Granton is at all afraid—" "I am not in the least afraid of you," Granton replied, coolly. "Come outside by all means. I will see you off the premises, and you can say what you want to say." Fidelia again turned with a little sob to Lady Scardale's arms. Her nerves were much shaken by the ordeal she had gone through. Lady Scardale soothed her, speaking softly and gently as to a tired child. Granton motioned to Bostock to go out of the room before him. With a salutation to the two women, Bostock passed out and Granton followed him, drawing the door after him. The two men went in silence through the silent corridors and down the stairs till they came to the front door, which Granton unlocked and unbarred. He flung it open, and the two men stood together in the doorway in the clear light. "Well," said Granton, "what have you got to say to me? Whatever it is, say it quickly and let this place be clear of you." "I have to say that this is a duel to the death between you and me." "All right," Granton said. "I have fought in a duel to the death before now, and been very sorry for it. I don't think I should be particularly sorry if the result in this case should prove to be the same as in the other. Can you fight, except with a foil unbaited?" "You will find that I can. The mark of your blow is likely to remain for some time. I shall cease to feel the hurt if I can finish up with you." "It does look ugly," Granton said. I lost my temper, I confess, seeing you in the room of a young lady for whom I and mine have the highest regard. And you are a thorough scoundrel, you know." Bostock shrugged his shoulders. "We needn't waste time now in calling names." He was as calm as if he were merely arguing some point of detail in a fencing match. "Perhaps I am a scoundrel. Are you sure that you are so very much better?" "What did you mean?" Granton asked, taking no notice of his question. "By what you said about my name just now?" "What I said," Bostock answered. "I know what your name was when you killed that girl's father. But we needn't waste time over that either. You will be anxious to return to the ladies, and I do not love your company so dearly that I should seek to detain you now." He emphasized the last word meaningly. Granton smiled slightly. He was interested in the man's composure. "When do you desire my company?" he asked. "Very soon," Bostock answered. "You and I hate each other. At least I hate you, which is enough for my purpose. You have struck me, and whatever you may think of me, you have given me the right to claim satisfaction for that insult. In the wild lands where you have lived, you have followed such wild laws. We must fight." "So you said just now," Granton said, "and I am agreed." "Will you promise me," Bostock asked, "to come to me where and when I call upon you within the next 3 days?" Granton reflected for a moment while Bostock watched him. "Do you hesitate?" Bostock inquired. "No," Granton replied, "I do not hesitate. The whole thing is a little eccentric in London, however possible it might be on the veldt or in the Calamity Camp, and in London one has more engagements than in those lively localities. However, I may say yes. I will come to you where and when you call upon me within the next 3 days." "Good," said Bostock. "Good night." He said this as tranquilly as a cherished guest might take farewell of some familiar friend. He walked leisurely down the street toward the Embankment. Granton watched him turn the corner and disappear. "There goes a cool and daring villain," he quoted to himself. "I wonder what our next meeting and parting will be like. Well, it doesn't matter much anyhow. If he is a scoundrel, I am a man of no account after all." Then Granton fastened the door again and went upstairs. "He knows the whole story," he said to himself, "and he is keeping it to tell my sister and everyone. Another reason why I should kill him if I can, or let him kill me." The two women waited for Rupert with much anxiety. Fidelia did not yet venture to tell Lady Scardale all that she knew about Bostock. She thought she had better tell all to Gerald first, take him now into her confidence and get his advice. He would come to her next morning, and there would be little time lost. To tell Lady Scardale that night would be only to subject her to needless alarm. There was nothing to be done for the moment, and nothing was less likely than that Bland would come back again. Then, of course, Mr. Granton would stay in the house that night, but this very thought made her uneasy. Why did he not come back? Could any harm have happened to him in the company of that man? Rupert soon came back very cheery, his manner all changed. "I have seen that poor fellow off the grounds," he said. "He is as mad as a hatter." "Mad? Do you think he is really mad?" Lady Scardale asked. "Ought we not to have him looked after? Is he dangerous?" "Oh, well, I don't mean to say that he is mad in that sense," Rupert answered carelessly. "But I am greatly afraid he is going off his head. He is full of wild, romantic ideas." "I should never have thought it, never suspected it. Lady Scardale exclaimed. "For that matter, nor I," her brother-in-law said, "but evidently he has heard something that put him out today," and he looked at Lady Scardale and then made a slight motion of his head to direct her attention towards Fidelia, who was sitting in a silent wonder over the part that to her mind Rupert was evidently playing. "Oh," Lady Scardale said, and she felt pity in her heart. But she quickly added, "He is not coming back here again." "No," Rupert said lightly, "he is not coming back here again. I think you may be pretty sure of that." Soon afterwards they said each other good night, and the troubled evening came to an end. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of Red Diamonds by Justin McCarthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Chapter 29. Waiting. During the whole course of the day that followed the events at the Culture College and the raid upon Fidelia's room, Granton received no news of Bostock. He felt certain that Bostock would send for him, and he felt a kind of curious interest to know what he would say, the same kind of interest that he remembered feeling as a boy when reading some serial story, which stopped at an exciting point with the words, "To be continued in our next." Wherever he went he left careful word of the place he was going to next, in order that any message which came from Bostock might be sent after him. He did not want Bostock to fancy by a moment's unnecessary delay that he had the least reason for not wishing to meet him. But no message came from the fencing-master all that day. Granton inquired anxiously of Lady Scardale about Fidelia's health when he saw his sister-in-law on the morning after Bostock's attempt. Lady Scardale quickly reassured him. "The dear girl is quite well," she said. "It would take more than the audacity of a fellow like that man, madman though he is, to shake her nerves, for I suppose he is mad, isn't he?" "Oh, yes," Rupert assented. "He must be quite mad, poor devil." "Didn't he say something?" Lady Scardale asked. "Or did I only fancy it in the excitement of last night, about your name and his name?" "Yes, he did say something of the sort," Granton answered, "and that confirms me in my impression that he is a little unhinged. I made a sort of guess at Bostock not being his real name, and he tried to retort with some wild tu quoque or another. But it's of no importance. I expect we shall never hear of the fellow again." "Do you think not?" "I think not. At least, I hope not. You see, he must know that his game is played out now, that he has little or no chance with Fidelia." "I am not surprised at his falling in love with Fidelia," said Lady Scardale. "I don't see how anybody could help that." And she gave a little sigh. "Neither do I," said Granton. "She is the sort of girl whom any man with a decent heart in his body ought to fall in love with, if he wasn't in love with anybody else, of course." And he laughed, but it was not a very convincing sort of laugh. It lacked heartiness. "You weren't in love with anyone else, Rupert?" Lady Scardale asked, rather sadly. Granton started. "I? No, why?" "You seem to have escaped the fascination." "I? Oh, a likely story. You forget, my dear sister, that I said any fellow with a decent heart in his body. Am I the sort of man for a girl like Fidelia Locke?" "I should have thought you were just the sort of man," Lady Scardale said. "You know, Rupert, that I like Mr. Aspen very much." "Gerald Aspen is a thundering good fellow," Granton interpolated. No doubt, Lady Scardale assented. "But all the same, there was a time when I thought things might have been different." Granton had been leaning on the chimney-piece, looking down into the fire. Though it was still September, the weather had been cold and raw and rainy, and Lady Scardale was a believer in fires. He now turned around and faced her. His eyes were very bright, but that might have been because he had been looking so intently into the fire. "My dear sister," he said, "perhaps there was a time when I, too, thought that things might have been different, but if there ever was such a time, it was a very short time, and it's quite over now. Dead and buried. Don't let us talk of that any more, please, dear." Lady Scardale gave another little sigh and was silent. Granton resumed his study of the fire. He saw all sorts of places there, the Veldt and Calamity Camp and Mexico and Siam, all the wild, strange regions in which he had lived and which he had sometimes loved, and he was thinking, somewhat bitterly, that the man with that sort of past was not quite the man to hope for the love of Fidelia Locke. Presently he said he must go, he had business in town. Lady Scardale asked him to stay and see Fidelia, who would be down directly, that he might assure himself that she was little the worse for the night's adventure. But Granton declined to stay. He had to go into town, he said, on important business, and it was possible that the business might keep him in town all day. He might even sleep at the club. There were bedrooms at the Voyagers' Club, and Granton could always get one there if he had not always kept one there since his election to its membership, for he liked the place and the people and the rumours from all the ends of the earth. He said that the winds of the world seemed to blow in the direction of the Voyagers' Club. So he shook Lady Scardale's hand and left her, and went on his way towards town. It was not his intention to return, at least for the present. He would wait, he thought, within touch of the Voyagers' Club until he heard from Bostock, until that business, however it were to end, would be ended. When that was off his mind, if it ended one way, why, he could return for a while to the Culture College and the society of Lady Scardale and the sight of Fidelia, with a lighter heart, and if it ended the other way, why, it would not matter at all. So when he got to the club he sent a little note to his sister-in-law, saying that he would be staying in town for a day or two, and then he set himself to waiting patiently for Bostock's message. It came at last on the morning of the second day. Granton was sitting at breakfast in the familiar room in the Voyagers. He had the morning paper propped up beside him, and he occasionally glanced at its columns, and he occasionally glanced out upon the green square, green still, although with a greyer green of autumn. He had just finished a review of a book of foreign travel which had set his fancy dancing freely over the surface of the civilized and uncivilized globe, when a club servant brought him a letter on a salver and told him that an answer was expected. The letter was addressed in a fine sloping hand that had something almost feminine in it, but Granton felt sure at once that it was written by no woman's hand, and that it was the letter he expected. He opened it quietly and read these words: "Keep your promise. Meet me tomorrow night at midnight at the old boat-house by the 3 Cups beyond Battersea. You will find your way easily if you follow this plan." At the bottom of the page was traced, not unskilfully, a sketch map of the streets which Granton was to traverse in order to reach this strange tryst. There was no signature to the letter, none was needed. Granton asked who had brought the message, and he was told that it was brought by an ordinary messenger. Granton got up and went to the desk in the middle of the room where the cashier sat. He took a sheet of paper and asked for an envelope. On the sheet of paper he wrote simply the words, "All right," put it into the envelope, which he fastened without addressing, and handed it to the servant to give to the messenger. This done, he quietly returned to the table where he had been sitting, resumed his newspaper, and finished reading his article. But when he had finished reading his article, when he had left the breakfast-room and was sitting in the little alcove where on a former occasion Gerald Aspen had sat and talked with Seth Chickering, he felt a graver mood come over him. This business was serious, there was no mistake about that. Granton had put his life in peril 100 times, for a woman, for a wager, for a jest, sometimes just for the mere pleasure of putting his life in danger. He had never studied his own feelings on any of these occasions, had never given any serious thought to their possible result. "I set very little value on human life," he used to say, "and least of all upon my own." But of late he had been learning that human life had a value, that even his own life had a value, and somehow the whole aspect of things seemed different. Involuntarily his thoughts drifted back to other days, to other occasions on which he had measured his skill and strength against the skill and strength of some other man, with life or the chance of death upon the struggle. There was that time, long ago, in Fontainebleau, when he was really little more than a boy, and when he and a young fool from the Spanish embassy measured swords for the sake of the bright eyes of a little actress from the Folies Bergères. He had wounded this man, he remembered, and lost the lady whose compassionate heart was melted by the sufferings of her stabbed Castilian. Then there was that sabre duel in the woods on the other side of the Neckar, opposite Heidelberg, where he got that cut across his forehead which he could still feel if he pushed back the hair, and where he so grievously slashed his opponent. There was that shooting business in the almost empty saloon of the steamboat on the Amazonas, when he was beating up filibusters for the San Grenada insurrection. There was the duel in the pine-wood at Calamity Camp, and worst of all, there was that unhappy quarrel and fight which ended so fatally in the veldt when Red Gundy killed Captain Warbler. It was a curious record to look back upon, but only the last item made him shudder. "By Jove," he said to himself thoughtfully, taking his cigar from his mouth and blowing upon the burning end until it glowed a fiery red. "By Jove, if that scoundrel should kill me now, perhaps it might be considered as a sort of expiation." The thought and the words brought Fidelia's face very vividly before him, and reminded him that he had things to do which he had never thought of doing before on the eve of any former struggle for life. "I am a man of property now," he said to himself with a melancholy laugh, "and property has its duties as well as its rights." He got up and had a cab called for, and when it came he got into it and told the man to drive to a certain famous firm of solicitors. When he got there he sent in his name, and the principal, who knew him, saw him, and in a few minutes Granton explained what he wanted. He wanted to make his will, and the instructions were simple. In the event of anything happening to him, the fortune that was waiting for him was to be divided into 3 equal parts. One was to go to his sister-in-law, Lady Scardale, to be employed as she should think best for the benefit of the Culture College in Chelsea. The second portion was to go to Fidelia Locke, the third to Gerald Aspen. When this was arranged, and it did not take very long, Granton thanked his legal friend and walked out into the air feeling like a free man. If the worst came to the worst, why, he should still be of some use to somebody. The words from Macbeth kept humming in his ears. Nothing in his life became him like the leaving it, until he almost laughed aloud. That fellow wouldn't be so anxious to kill me, he thought, if he knew that his deed would serve to benefit Gerald Aspen, whom he hates. The thought of Gerald Aspen spurred him. I shall do my level best not to let that fellow kill me, he decided. It would never do to have him knocking about with the power of injuring Gerald, and through Gerald, Fidelia. He got back to the club, and sat down in a quiet room which was called the reading-room, and in which silence was popularly supposed to be observed, and there he wrote several letters. One was to Gerald, that was comparatively short. Another and much longer letter was addressed to Lady Scardale. The third, which took more time and thought than either of the others, was addressed to Fidelia Locke. It was a short letter, but every word came directly from his heart, and yet it said nothing which Fidelia need mind anyone, Lady Scardale or Gerald or anyone else, seeing. It was a simple letter of farewell and good wishes, the kind of prayer for a woman's happiness that a man like Granton can sometimes find words to express. These 3 letters he enclosed in a large envelope, on which he wrote, "To Captain the Honourable John Raven, to be opened in a certain contingency." This letter he enclosed again in a further envelope, together with a short note to Raven, asking him, in the event of Granton not claiming the package in a few days, to open it and send the enclosed letters to their respective addressees. This he sealed, addressed to Raven, and gave it to the hall porter, with the instructions that it was to be delivered to Captain Raven the first thing the following morning. Granton particularly impressed upon the man that he was not upon any account to deliver the letter to Raven that night. Having done all this, Granton gave a sigh of relief. He had not done so much business for many a long day, and he was amused as he reflected upon it. Now he felt himself free to spend the rest of the day in any way he pleased. "I have earned a holiday," he said to himself. "How shall I enjoy it?" It was luncheon hour by this time, so he went upstairs and found Raven sitting at a table by himself, and Granton joined him and listened with pleasure while Raven talked about Lydia. Raven was not expecting Hiram Boringer, but presently Hiram suddenly turned up and joined them. They talked of travel, as became 3 such members of the Voyagers' Club. Raven announced his intention of going around the world with his bride. Hiram spoke of an expedition to the South Pole. "The little old South Pole doesn't get a chance nowadays," he said, "and I mean to give it a new start." Granton observed that he, too, thought of going for a journey, a long journey, but when the others asked him where he thought of going, he answered that he hadn't quite made up his mind yet. It depended somewhat upon circumstances. So the time slipped by. As they rose from the table, Granton, looking at Hiram, thought to himself, "Here would be the very man to take with me to see fair in this business. But then," he thought, "no, the other man expects me to go alone, and alone I will go." "Like to say a word to you," Hiram announced, as if he had been reading Granton's thoughts. "All right," Granton replied. Raven vanished to look after the business of the club generally. Granton and Hiram went down to the recess on the stairs where, since the opening of this story, so many cigars and cigarettes have been smoked. Hiram began abruptly. "You know that man Bostock?" "Yes, I know him," Granton said with emphasis. "Well, I'm getting to know him. Do you like him?" "No, certainly not." "No more do I. Do you know anything against him?" "I rather fancy I do," Granton answered with emphasis. "Well, somehow I rather fancy I do too. Do you know I've just come back from Naples?" "Really? Very nice place, Naples." "Yes, but I didn't go there to see Mount Vesuvius or the ruins of Pompeii." "Well, no," Granton said, after looking fixedly in Hiram's face. "I don't suppose you did this time." "No, I went to find out about this man Bostock. I would have taken my Bible oath I saw him in a low drinking place there years ago, and I saw him in a row, and saw him throw a knife at a Swedish sailor, and hit him in the throat, and I told him so." "Told who?" "Why, told Bostock, of course." "Yes, what did he say?" "Said it wasn't true, said it was an utter mistake of mine." "Perhaps it was." "Oh, no, it was not. That's what I went to Naples to find out about. Look here, shipmate, I don't care much if a man throws a knife at another in a row at a drinking shop. That don't concern me. I may have done as bad as that more than once in my life. So may you, perhaps." "So may I, perhaps," Granton answered gravely. "But when it comes to denying it, don't you see, that becomes a different sort of question. Suppose you hit a man with a knife in a row at Naples years and years ago. Why, I say, what's that to me?" "Nothing much, certainly," Granton said. He was beginning to be interested now in Hiram's story. "No, but suppose you say you weren't the man as threw the knife, and showed a mighty skill with the knife, and I can prove that you were. How about that, messmate? What sort of a light does that throw on other charges that may have been made against you, and which you have equally denied? Don't you see? How about them, I want to know?" "If you can prove your first charge, it does look very serious as regards the others," Granton said. "But can you prove that this Bostock is the man who threw the knife in Naples, and then said he was not the man?" Granton was now quite eager about the business. "I can prove it," Hiram exclaimed. I have been to Naples. I have got hold of a chap who was there, and who swears he could identify the man who threw the knife anywhere, and he is none of your blooming Italians, but an honest Englishman who lives in Naples, and I have brought him over here and shown him Bostock, and he says he'll swear to Bostock being the man before any judge and jury in Great Britain." Granton meditated for a moment. "But admitting that this is all true," he said at last, "what do you mean to charge against Bostock? Our courts of law don't take account of rows in public-houses in Naples." "No, but I may have other charges, and if he is a liar in one he is a liar in all, I take it." "Well," said Granton after another pause, "I take it so too. I also may have other charges against him. I am very much obliged for your information. It is of great importance to me. Will you act on my advice?" "That I will, most certainly." "Then do nothing until tomorrow. Don't talk of this thing to anyone until tomorrow. If I can, I will see you tomorrow, here at 1 o'clock. If I don't see you, then take the course that seems best to you. You are sure to hear news before that." "I don't quite understand," Hiram said. "Wait until tomorrow," Granton answered, "and you will understand all." "All right, I'll wait." End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of Red Diamonds by Justin McCarthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Chapter 30. A Busy Night. Granton groped his way as well as he could through the black bewilderment of the place. Anyone who has ever explored the riverside regions from Battersea upstream knows that it is a somewhat perplexing locality at the best of times, but at the worst of times, on such a pitch-dark night, for instance, as the night in which Granton set out to keep his mysterious appointment with Japhet Bland, it was a terrible maze. In spite of his almost unconquerable high spirits, Granton felt angrily inclined to swear, as he stumbled over piles of wood and heaps of refuse, and felt his way by the touch of slimy walls. The night was indeed intensely dark. There was no moon in the sky, there was scarcely a single star. He was really more morally conscious of the close neighborhood of the river lapsing along at his right hand than visually cognizant of its existence. He could hear it lapping in a kind of hungry way among the timbers of the wharves. He could hear, too, the grinding sound of barge against barge, as the great masterful stream flung them heavily one against the other. But to his sight the highway of the river was scarcely discernible from the highway of the road, and in places he was obliged to pick his steps carefully, lest he should plunge unexpectedly into the dark water. Nobody seemed to be stirring abroad. "How quiet is this night," Granton said to himself with Iago, as he plunged on into the darkness. Suddenly he came to a halt. By the light of a gas-lamp he saw that the road parted. One way went straight ahead, the other swerved aside, as if leading straight down to the river. "This must be the place," Granton murmured. There was a house in front of him, standing by itself in the fork of the road. Granton drew near and studied it. It was a riverside public-house of a most disreputable type, a house that may once have been a decent place enough, but which now in the long process of time had run hopelessly to seed, and looked as dingy and squalid and out at elbows as the loafers who hung about it in its waking hours. Now it was fast asleep. No gleam of light came from under its closed doors or oozed from its hooded windows. "This must be the place," Granton said again, as he studied with a certain melancholy amusement the battered hulk of the old hostelry. Yes, it was the place. In faded letters over the filthy door he made out the name of the place, the 3 Cups. Now then, at last, he was nearly at his journey's end. He took the paper out of his pocket to make sure, and standing under the gas-lamp went over the plan again. It was quite clear. He was to follow the road which ran down the river by the 3 Cups. He had not far to go now. Without a moment's hesitation, he turned and went on the directed way. If the way had been bad before, it was worse now. If it had been dark before, the very spirit of blackness seemed to be upon it now. Granton stumbled along, wishing, like Ajax, for light, wishing, too, that he had thought of bringing a lantern with him. It seemed to him as if all the old iron, all the broken oars and shattered boats in the world were collected along that dismal beach for the special purpose of bruising the foolhardy legs of any rash adventurer into that no-man's land. However, he made his way along as well as he could, with his right hand firmly closed upon the revolver in the pocket of his reefing coat. "By Jove," said Granton to himself, "if the fellow wants to murder me, this is as pretty a spot for him to do it in as heart of oak could desire, and I must do my best to thwart him. The only consolation is that it must be as hard for him to see me as for me to see him." As Granton made this reflection, he slipped. His foot had tripped over a stone, and he nearly fell. The stone went bounding down the decline, rattling noisily. "Well, if he can't see me, he can hear me," Granton thought, "and if he is skilled in the art of firing in the direction of a sound, it may be awkward." The thought had scarcely formed itself in his mind when a red light flashed out of the darkness some way ahead of him and remained motionless, like a single crimson star. "The signal," Granton said to himself. "Then he is there at all events," and he pushed on rapidly in the direction of the light. From the wharf, whose rotting timbers trembled at every step Granton took, a kind of crazy bridge jutted out in the river and connected the wharf with a square, hut-like building erected on piles. What it had been built for it would have been hard for Granton to say. Perhaps it had served as a kind of landing stage, perhaps it had been a storehouse for coal for tugs and tenders. Certainly in its present aspect it seemed to have been long disused. The planks that formed the crazy bridge creaked and groaned ominously as Granton put his foot on them. There had, it would appear, been a handrail, for one or two of the uprights still stood in their places, jagged and lonely, but the connected rail had long since vanished, and the adventurous explorer had to look to it lest he should stray from the straight course and stumble into the river. It would be a bad business, Granton thought to himself, for anyone who should stumble into the river just at this point, where the stream seemed to go at a racing speed, and where nobody could hear, or would heed if they did hear, the cries of a strong swimmer in his agony. Just ahead of him, Granton could see the red light of the lantern, where it hung evidently on a nail on the outside of the house, and by its side a long perpendicular line of fainter and lower light showed that the door of the hut was ajar. A faint gleam of light upon the water on the left showed that on that side of the hut there was a window. "This is the place," Granton said to himself, "and a murderous-looking place it is to meet an enemy in." He was standing on the shore end of the scarecrow of a bridge, slightly wondering what was to happen next. There came no sound of any kind from the hut. There was no sign of any life abroad. The only conscious thing besides himself in the utter blackness and dismalness of the whole place was that single disk of crimson fire which seemed to eye him malevolently, with a malign watchfulness like the eye of some guardian Cyclops. "I wonder what he is going to do," Granton said to himself, while the fingers of his right hand closed around the stock of the revolver in his pocket. "If he means mischief, this is a nasty place for mischief as any scoundrel could desire. But it won't do for me to let him think that I am afraid of him." Having come to this conclusion, Granton lifted up his voice in a loud "Cooee," such a cooee as he had often sent into the depths of the lonely Australian bush in old days, a cooee that sounded strangely out of place among the crumbling wharves and the black and sullen waters. Granton felt a curious tightening of the heart as that old familiar cry, recalling so many far-off scenes and strange experiences, died away into the night. He was about to repeat it when the yellow spear of light by the side of the crimson star suddenly widened. The door was thrown back, and Granton could see the figure of a man silhouetted against the illuminated interior of the hut. For a moment Granton stood still, with his fingers closing upon his pistol, and for a moment the figure in the doorway stood still and silent. Then it suddenly found a voice. "Is that you?" the voice said, and Granton knew it at once for Bostock's. "Come along then, and don't make that confounded noise. You are late, you know." How like the son's voice is to the father's now, Granton thought, now when all disguise was set aside, and the old bad blood was fairly free to dominate its owner. Without a word he advanced along the wretched bridge. It widened out of a kind of platform just before the hut. As Granton reached this platform, the shadow disappeared from the doorway. Granton, following it, passed through the wide open door. If the hut was dingy enough and dismal enough in its outward show, it was more dismal and more dingy still internally. Lit by a big flaring oil lamp without a shade, it displayed itself in all its glaring ugliness and meanness. Whatever it had been, office or storeroom or what else, nothing of whatever former respectability it may have possessed now remained to it. The paper which had once covered the wooden walls hung in filthy strips, like the tatters of a beggar's cloak. There was no covering to the grimy wooden floor, there was no covering to the filthy wooden table which occupied the centre of the place. There was no curtain in the crazy window, through whose broken panes the wind came in and shook the newspaper which had been nailed up over it to exclude any view of the interior of the hut from any passing boat. A small fire smouldered in a rusty old stove in one corner of the room. The table was littered with papers. There was only one chair. the chair in which Bland had been sitting, writing, when he was disturbed by the sound of Granton's approach. All these details Granton took in at a rapid glance, as he stood in the room with his hand on the pistol in his pocket, watching Bland, who carefully closed the door after him. Bland locked the door, and turning around faced Granton. "You are late, you know," he said again. "Very likely," Granton answered coolly. "If you will roost in such a devil of an out-of-the-way place as this, you must make some allowance for your visitors." He smiled as he spoke, for he felt an amused curiosity to see what Bland would do next. He was quite prepared for some treacherous attack, and he was not in the least alarmed. His smile seemed to irritate Bland. "Well, you have got here somehow," he said, "and that is the main point." "Are you so very anxious to keep me now that you have got me, that you lock the door so carefully?" Granton inquired, very politely and still smiling. "I locked the door," Bland answered, "because it won't keep shut if I don't lock it. The place isn't a palace." "So I perceive," Granton interpolated, "but I don't care about palaces, and I have been in worse holes than this in my time, and even in worse company." Bland's expressionless face showed no signs of annoyance at the taunt. "The place isn't a palace," he said again, "but it will do very well for our purpose." "And what is our purpose, if I may venture to inquire?" Granton asked, "for really at present I am rather in the dark as to what that purpose may be." Bland motioned towards the empty chair. "Sit down," he said. Granton made a gesture of refusal. "There is only one chair," he said. "I will sit here," said Bland. He swept a space clear on the table by pushing the papers that littered it to one end, and he propped himself up on the space thus cleared. He was tall, and the table was a low one, so that his feet remained on the ground, planted close together well in front of him. Granton noted the attitude, noted how easily it gave the man the opportunity to spring forward if he chose, and noting it, again smiled slightly. Bland caught the smile and understood it. "If you are afraid to sit," he said, "stand by all means." Granton seated himself in the chair and crossed one leg lazily over the other. "I am not one little bit afraid of you," he said quietly. "It is not the first time that I have sat in the society of murderers. You forget that I had the pleasure of knowing your father." Bland's dull eye gained no lustre. Bland's rigid face remained unchanged, but there was a faint tremble in his voice which betrayed the suppressed passion of his intense hate. "I could shoot you where you sit," he said. Granton slightly shrugged his shoulders. "Oh, I know what you mean," Bland went on. "You mean that two can play at that game." Granton nodded good-humouredly. "Of course," Bland went on, "I knew pretty well that you wouldn't be such a fool as to trust yourself here alone with me unarmed. Of course I know very well that now as you sit here you have your hand on your pistol, and that at the first suspicious movement I make you will shoot me on the spot. You have shot a man through your pocket before now, very likely." "You are right in most of your conjectures," Granton replied. "I certainly was not fool enough to come here unarmed. I certainly have you covered at this moment, and I certainly should not hesitate for a moment to cheat the gallows by shooting you down if I saw the slightest hint of treachery on your part. And you are quite right, there was a ruffian in Wichita once who was going to stab a man in the back, and I winged him with a shot through my pocket. And now that we understand each other so perfectly, suppose that we get on to business." "I have asked you here," said Bland, speaking very slowly, the quiet, deliberate, monotonous tone of his enunciation contrasting curiously with the words he was using. "I have asked you here because you and I have an account to settle, and this is the best time, and this is the best place for us to settle that account in. You hate me." Granton nodded again. "And I hate you. I hate you more than I hated the others whose scores I have settled, more than I hate the fool whom you have chosen to help, and whom you have as good a reason to hate as I have, for he has taken the woman you love from you." "There are some things you had better not talk about," Granton interrupted, "or I may take premature action. I warn you of that, and you will be wise to take the warning. I do not expect you to understand what a gentleman feels." Bland's dull eyes seemed to grow a little duller, otherwise he showed no sign of having heard what Granton said, and he went on in the same slow, monotonous voice. "We have been playing a long time, you and I, and it isn't ended yet." "I beg your pardon," Granton interrupted. "The game is quite over, and you have lost." Bland shook his head. "There you are wrong," he said. "There you are going too fast. There you have made a mistake. The game isn't quite over yet as far as you and I are concerned. We've been playing for big stakes, and somebody else has swept the pool, but you and I have our little private account to settle still." "If you are thinking of another murder," said Granton very composedly, "I should advise you not to try it on, for my finger is still upon the trigger, and you would be a dead man before you had time to move from the table." "I hope to kill you," Bland said, "but killing isn't always murder." "No," said Granton, "it is sometimes justice." Bland shrugged his shoulders. "Call it justice if you like," he said. "I hate you, and I should like to kill you. You hate me, and I dare say you would like to kill me." "I should have no very particular objection," Granton admitted. Bland, still watching him closely, leaned slightly forward. "You call me a scoundrel," he said. "Perhaps I am. I do not think you are a great deal better, all things considered." "I beg your pardon," Granton interrupted. "I am not an assassin." Bland waved away his interruption impatiently. "Some men killed my father," he said passionately. "Fairly or foully, justly or unjustly, some men killed my father, killed him and cheated him, killed him and cheated me. I wanted revenge. You know who I am now. I suppose you guess I am the man you have all been looking for so anxiously, and failing to find so hopelessly, the man with the red beard." "Yes," said Granton, "I began to suppose as much." Bland got up and went to the wall, where a heavy overcoat was hanging. He took something out of the pocket and lifted it to his head. Then he turned around and faced Granton, and Granton started at the sudden skilful transformation. A head of crisply curled red hair, beard, whiskers, and moustache of the same hue completely changed him. In an imperfect light they would have seemed quite natural, and would have made him wholly unrecognizable. In that moment Granton saw face to face the man who had rushed against him out of the little passage in St. James's Street on the night of the murder of Seth Chickering. "Ah," he said, drawing a deep breath. "That is a good disguise." Bland plucked the wig and beard off sharply, and turning, thrust them back again into the pocket of the overcoat. Then he came back and leaned against the table, again facing Granton. "You know that I am Japhet Bland," he said, "and I know that you were once called Red Gundy. We are bitter foes, you and I. There are people for whom you would like it always to be concealed that Rupert Granton and Red Gundy are the same man. I should prefer that not too many people know I was Japhet Bland. You think yourself a better man than I, but you began life with better chances than I did. I learned in bitter poverty, from cruel hunger, from grinding cold, the longing for money, for power, for the things that men like you know and enjoy from the first. Like father, like son, it was my father's way too." "Yes, you take after him," said Granton. "You may be a better man than I," Bland went on, "but you are not good enough to have the right to refuse to fight me. You have thwarted me, you have struck me. In the wild, mad world to which we belong, both of us, disgrace and scoundrelism don't count for enough to prevent you from fighting me, and fighting me to the death." "I have said that I would fight with you," said Granton, "and I will keep my word. I decline, of course, to admit that there is no great difference between an assassin and myself, but since it has come to this I will fight with you, and will kill you if I can." "Yes, if you can," Bland answered, coldly. "I too, if I can, will kill, be sure of that." "I have no doubt whatever," Granton said. "When and where?" "When and where? Why, here, of course. We needn't journey to the ends of the earth to finish our little business. Either we fight here and with my weapons, or the shooting begins. There will have to be a fight anyway." Granton's combative blood always heated quickly, as he had learned once and again to his cost. Now, in that queer place, with that murderous madman facing him, he began to feel as eager for battle as in his old schoolboy days. All regard for the possible consequences, whether he lost or won, left him in a wild desire for conflict. "No more talk," he said. "Where are your weapons?" Bland rose from the table and, turning, opened a drawer. From this drawer he took out 2 knives in sheaths and laid them upon the table. Granton saw at once that they were Bowie knives. "They are just the same," Bland said. "One as good as the other, both of steel as good as ever I saw, both as sharp as hate. Take whichever you like." Granton got up from his chair and came to the table. The 2 knives lay before him side by side in their leather sheaths, their handles, according to the pattern of the true Bowie, sloping to a greater thickness towards the hilt, so as to give the hand a firmer hold for thrusting upwards. He took up one and drew it from its sheath. It certainly was a beautiful blade, finely tempered, finely shaped, with its crescent-like curve at the end and its exquisite edge, a weapon keen enough and strong enough to disembowel a bear. He poised it in his hand. It was of the right weight and perfectly adjusted. Granton nodded his approval. "Look at the other one," Bland said, seeing that Granton was about to draw back from the table with the knife in his hand. "Look at the other one. Don't make a choice without knowing what you are choosing." There was something so grimly eccentric in Bland's courtesy, something so queer about this whole business of deliberately choosing the knife with which he was to fight his host in 5 minutes, that Granton could scarcely forbear from smiling. But as he took up the second knife and looked at it, he recollected that it was no smiling matter. On his skill, his strength, and his power of using that knife depended his chances of getting away alive. The thought flashed across his mind that after all it was scarcely worth while to have wandered over so much of the earth's surface in search of adventure, only to find the strangest adventure of his life in his own land and on the fringe of his own capital. A duel with knives fought with a madman in a crazy riverside hut on the Thames was an adventure stranger in its ironic unexpectedness than anything which had befallen him in the far corners of the world. However, he was in for it, that was obvious enough. Even if he could have declined this queer wager of battle which was thus thrust upon him, Bland would have attacked him all the same, with knife or pistol, and he would have had to fight in his own defence. Even if he shot Bland down, the business would be a bad one, difficult to explain, and besides, he would not have honoured the promise for which he had put himself into peril. No, he had given his word, and he would go through with the business. After all, it did not matter very much now what became of him. Whether his vagabond life ended here in this dismal place from a push of a madman's knife, or out yonder, far away, in a year or 2, or 10 years, or 20, mattered very little. Anyhow, he would try the chance. He put back the knife upon the table and took up the one he had first looked at. "They both seem to me to be equally good," he said, "but if there is any choice to be made, why, I choose this." "Very well," said Bland, and he leaned forward and took up the other weapon. Madman though he was as composed as if he were still in the fencing school giving directions to a pupil. "Let us clear a space to move in." As he spoke, he pushed the table back against the wall facing the river, pushed it back so violently that the wall seemed to quiver and the whole of the hut to shake with the force of the concussion. "What a ramshackle old concern the place is," Granton thought to himself, and then it struck him as odd to think such trivial thoughts at such a crisis, and then he found himself mentally repeating the words, ramshackle old concern, very much as a child repeats sets of words, the jingle of which has caught and pleased its ear. All the while he continued to watch Bland with the curiosity of a spectator at a play. If Bland was excited, he showed no sign of excitement. He moved about with perfect composure, pushing things out of the way and picking up some of the papers which had fallen on the floor when he had thrust the table aside. Granton felt that he himself was distinctly growing excited, but yet that it was with the excitement of a spectator of some curious performance, not of an actor in what was to be a life-and-death struggle. He was hardly conscious that he was to be an actor, not a spectator of this life-and-death struggle, even when Bland, having cleared all the space possible in the wretched hut, turned to Granton and asked him with as much impassibility as if he were inviting him to take a walk, "Are you ready?" Granton simply nodded. The occasion really called for as few words as possible, and it was well to save his breath. "Very well," said Bland. "Let us begin." He took off his coat, rolled it into a ball, and placed it on the table. He rolled up his shirt-sleeves above his elbow, and unfastened his collar at the throat. Then he drew the knife from its sheath, and put the sheath on the table. He looked inquiringly at Granton, who had rapidly made the same preparations. Then the fight began. The two antagonists approached each other warily, each gripping his knife in the true frontier fashion, with the point upwards. As they advanced, the thought came into Granton's mind that perhaps Bland had the Spanish knack of throwing a knife and intended to do so. He remembered seeing two bullfighters once settle a quarrel in this way, in the yard of a posada outside Seville, and he remembered with an involuntary shudder the way in which one navaja went like an arrow into the heart of one of the combatants. A quick man with his wits about him can parry even the swiftest cast of a knife, however, if he is in the least prepared for it, and Granton resolved to be well prepared. But there seemed to be no intention of the kind in Bland's thoughts. He seemed to be animated, so far as the term animation could be applied to his methodical, almost mechanical actions, by a single desire for a hand-to-hand struggle with Granton, with the life of the vanquished as the price of the victor. Slowly, very slowly, the two men approached each other, each with his gaze fixed upon the other's face, watching his eyes and trying to read his intentions there. Suddenly there was a simultaneous spring, and in a moment both men were struggling across the floor together, each grasping with his left hand the armed right hand of his opponent. Desperately, silently, they struggled, breathing hard, with their muscles knit, with their pale faces staring at each other, while the great knives gleamed high in the air as they caught the glare from the flaring lamp, and the crazy hut shook till it seemed to reel beneath their trampling feet. Granton was a strong man, in good condition of body. His life of adventure had never been a life of profligacy, and all his physical capacities were trained and tempered to their best. But he found in Bland a terrible antagonist. The man's lean body seemed to be as sinewy and as supple as a panther's. His grasp around Granton's wrist was like a clenched circle of hammered steel. Granton had the advantage in weight, and in the first onrush had succeeded in driving his enemy backwards by the mere pressure of his weight, but the extraordinary elasticity of Bland's body soon enabled him to recover from the effect of the first impetus and to hold his ground. For a few seconds that seemed to last for centuries, the two men stood still together, glaring at each other, clinging to each other. In the awful silence Granton could hear the ticking of his own watch, and the lapping of the water underneath the planks on which they were standing. He could see on the wall before him the horrible fantastic shadows they cast, two distorted shapes like demons wrestling for the mastery. Then, with a desperate effort, the two men flung themselves free again, and each fell back a few paces preparatory to a fresh spring. As they did so, Granton, his senses all alive and on the watch, noticed that the theatre of the tragedy they were playing was not the best possible place to have chosen for such an encounter. The place shook as he had seen houses shake in lands where earthquakes were a daily possibility and almost a daily event. The boards groaned and creaked ominously. The dilapidated window rattled noisily. Queerly enough, the rattle of the window in the sash carried Granton's memory back to the rattle of castanets, of the castanets the girl had played that noonday in Seville, the gypsy girl who had caused the quarrel between the bullfighters. Somehow the whole scene seemed to rise up before him again, only that he and Bland appeared to have taken the place of the bullfighters, while the gypsy girl had the features and the fair hair of Fidelia Locke. The fancy came and went in a second of breathing space before the sundered foemen closed again. Once more and warily they drew near to each other. Once more, with the same sudden, simultaneous motion, they leaped forward and closed again in the same tight grasp of deadly purpose, hand again grasping wrist, the gleaming weapons again high in air. But this time Granton found it less easy to bear Bland back. His enemy held his ground, all his body seemed stiffened into steel, and though Granton pressed upon him with all his weight, he could not succeed in forcing him to yield an inch. The two men stood in the same spot, swaying to right and left. Then Bland made a furious effort, and Granton began to give way and go back. He resisted desperately, but unavailingly. For the moment Bland was getting the better of him, and he began to fear that his strength, great as it was, had less staying power in it than Bland's. So he allowed Bland to bear him back a little, while the hut groaned and shook at every move they made. He was trying to recover new breath, collecting all his forces for a new effort. Suddenly Bland flung his leg around Granton's and tried to throw him. The act was swiftly and skilfully done, but it did not find Granton unprepared. He had been expecting Bland to make the attempt, and he was as much on his guard as a man can be who is fighting for his life with a madman and has to be ready to meet half a dozen different deadly possibilities at once. If Bland was as tenacious as the ivy, Granton was as strong as the oak, and though he could not shake off the leg grip in which Bland held him, trying to bear him back and down, he stood his ground stubbornly. Baffled, Bland withdrew his leg and leaped back, and the men stood apart, joined only by their grasped hands in an arch above them. Then Granton again began to bear Bland back, slowly, inch by inch, towards the wall. The fierce desire for life was now fully awake in him, and side by side with it the fierce desire for revenge upon the foe who threatened his life. Granton was now as much of an animal, fighting for its existence, as Bland, but his face showed its passion, while Bland's remained all through as passionless as a mask. Perhaps long command of feature had given his face an unconquerable rigidity, but now, even in this death grapple, and in the midst of all his rage, Granton found himself wondering at the astonishing impassibility of the face opposed to him, at the lustreless, expressionless eyes that looked back into his. As they neared the wall, Bland suddenly, with a desperate effort, stiffened himself against Granton's impetus and held his ground. This brought the two men close together again, and Granton, repeating Bland's tactics of a minute earlier, locked his right leg around Bland's leg in an attempt to throw him. Bland swayed, reeled, struggled, and fell heavily back against the wall by the window, with a heavy crash which made the trembling room reel. Granton's leg had slipped down, and for a moment the two men lay against the wall, their bodies pressed together. Then Blunt recovered himself and pushed Granton, who was breathed by the effort, a little from him. For a moment they stood again face to face, with their gripped wrists still high in the air, glaring at each other. Then they locked legs once more, and once again the two men fell heavily with all their weight against the wall by the window. There was a hideous crash, a horrible sound of ripping wood, of the tearing of parting planks, a momentary intense glare behind as the lamp fell forward, flaring up. Granton was only conscious, horribly conscious, that he was falling forward into infinity with the pale, set face of Blunt beneath him. The descent seemed to last forever, and yet it was over in a second, and it ended in the cold waters of the river. The flimsy wall of the wretched hut had given way beneath their weight, and had precipitated the combatants into the Thames. Granton rose to the surface in a moment, but not immediately to consciousness of his position. Like a man who emerges from the influence of laughing gas or the anguish of a painful dream, he felt for the moment bewildered, uncertain where to place himself in the world of realities. But this uncertainty lasted only for an infinitesimal fraction of time. Recollection of what had happened came back to him, for the fight which had just been interrupted, of the shattered wall, the fall, the plunge into the chill water. Keeping himself afloat, Granton, who was as good at swimming as at all other bodily exercises, looked around him. The swift current had already carried him some distance from the scene of the struggle, but the water all around him was covered with the wreck and welter of the ruined building. Looking behind him, Granton could see a thin column of grey smoke rise up against the blackness of the night, and the leap of one or two tiny tongues of scarlet flame. He guessed at once that the lamp which had been upset had not been extinguished and was making a bonfire of the ruins. Or perhaps the shattered embers of the stove were doing the work. So much the better, Granton thought, as he drifted with the stream. His next thought was, what had I better do? The water was very cold, the night was very dark. The sooner he got out of the river and on shore, the better. Ought he to swim back and try to discover what had become of Blunt? He asked himself, and on reflection he answered, no. Whatever had become of Blunt, he was certainly very well out of Granton's way, and Granton really did not feel that he was called upon by any exaggerated spirit of chivalry to further peril his life by seeking for the murderer who had just been attempting to add one more to his many crimes. The hideous struggle in which Granton had just been engaged had come to what he must consider to be a satisfactory conclusion. He did not want to kill Blunt with his own hand, but still less did he wish that Blunt should kill him, and one or other of these terminations to the fight would have been inevitable if it had not been for the unexpected collapse of the theatre in which the strange duel was going on. The immediate thing, Granton felt, was to get out of the river as quickly as he could. The current was very swift, and Granton was greatly fatigued by the desperate struggle he had just been going through, but the keen chill of the water stimulated his strained muscles and overwrought nerves, and lent him for the moment a kind of spurious energy. Watching his opportunity and husbanding his strength, he succeeded in getting close to the Surrey shore. In the thick darkness it was very difficult to distinguish objects, and Granton was obliged to act with great caution, but at last he succeeded in catching hold of a rope which held a barge alongside to a wharf. To this rope he clung panting for some seconds, realizing for the first time how tired he was. His wet clothes hung about him like lead, and his breath came hard and fast. With a desperate effort he drew himself along the rope to the side of the barge, and, mustering all his remaining strength, he dragged himself on board. Once on board, he dropped to the ground from sheer exhaustion. But he knew that he dared not rest long. The chill would soon be eating into him, so, summoning some further energy, he scrambled from the barge to the wharf and made the best of his way inland. The river had carried him a considerable way, and he had come ashore a little below Westminster Bridge. Dripping as he was, he staggered through a network of dismal alleys, till he emerged upon Westminster Bridge Road. An all-night public-house stood at the corner of the road from which he came. He entered the private bar, streaming like a river god, to the astonishment of the little crowd who were drinking and of the young lady behind the bar. In a few words Granton explained that he had fallen into the river and wanted some brandy and a cab. He drank off half a tumbler full of the spirit in the midst of the staring group, declined the landlord's civil offer for a change of clothes, for he was anxious to get away as quickly as possible. By this time a hansom was obtained. Granton distributed the silver still remaining in his pockets among the crowd, and drove off as quickly as the horse could go. The moment he got back to his own place, he had a hot bath, drank some more brandy, and tumbled into bed as soon as possible. "Well," he said to himself, with a smile as he slipped between the sheets, "Rupert, my friend, you have had a very busy night of it, a very busy night indeed. I don't think that you ever had quite so busy a night before." He turned over on his side and was just dozing off to sleep when a thought occurred to him which partially aroused him. "I wonder what has become of Bland?" he asked himself. Then he fell asleep and slept till noon. End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of Red Diamonds by Justin McCarthy. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. Chapter 31. A Letter. Misery's Hotel, Pera, Constantinople. My dear sister, for surely I may call you sister, you who have always been as good to me as if I were indeed your brother. I am writing now to say good-bye to you for a long time. I hope that we shall meet again. I look forward with all my heart to such a meeting, but time must elapse, time for healing, time for forgetting, time for forgiving. Did you think that the vagabond was reclaimed, that the restless adventurer had become reconciled with civilization and society and all the rest of it, that the wild ass of the desert was going to eat contentedly in civic stables? Did you think all this, my dear sister? If you did, it would not be surprising, for indeed I thought it, or at least half thought it myself. It really did seem for a little while as if Rupert Granton, the ne'er-do-well, had positively made up his mind to settle down and become a respectable member of a respectable community. But the end was not yet, you see. Here I am in dear old Stamboul, pausing on the edge of the great world of adventure. I always think that the long bridge across the Golden Horn is, as it were, the gateway to Wonderland. I have crossed it often before, soon I shall cross it again, shall make my plunge into outer darkness, and turn up heaven knows where, perhaps at Tibet among the Buddhists, perhaps in China. Shall I fetch you a hair of the great Cham's beard? Perhaps at Ispahan. I do not know, and I do not care. To a citizen of the world like myself, injured by long experience, one place is as much home as another, as much home at least as I shall ever know. Please don't think that I am going to be sentimental, or sigh because a rolling stone doesn't gather moss. I haven't the slightest desire to gather moss, and should not know what to do with it if I did gather it. No, my Bohemian blood is throbbing in my pulses, and its pulsations told me that I must be up and doing. That vague, indefinable, unconquerable feeling which the gypsy, which the Arab, which every wanderer knows so well, was upon me, and it had to be obeyed. It is no use to struggle against it. I know but little and care less for our family history, the history of a family into which you married, my dear sister, heartily to your good fortune. But I sometimes wonder if any of the ancestral Grantons ever wedded a gypsy woman, or if, by chance, some crusading forefather picked up a Saracenic bride. If either of these events happened, it would account perhaps for the vagrant blood in me, the vagrant blood that needs will keep my body drifting idly over the world. Have you started a new fencing master yet? If so, I trust he will prove more satisfactory than his predecessor. I know that you expressed a great deal of pity for the fellow when Bostock's body was fished up out of the Thames at Gravesend. If he did commit suicide, it was no sighing matter. The world was better off without him. Certainly some folk who were very dear to you and me may breathe more freely for his absence from the game. I happen to have learned something about the man, and I may as well tell you in confidence that he was the secret enemy who was striking at Gerald's life. More than this I do not care to say, and more than this, therefore, I am sure you, my dear, will not want to ask. The fellow was a great scoundrel. I regret the conditions which helped to make him such a scoundrel. I cannot honestly say that I feel any regret for him. Well, there are queer people in the world, and your friend Bostock was one of the queerest. I have met a lot of strange chaps in my time, and shall meet a few more, I dare say, but I scarcely expect to beat him. Happily, I have never learned cynicism from my wanderings and my experiences. I am glad to think that the good people outnumber the bad, and I am glad to think that it has been my privilege of late to know such a number of dear people in the dear old country, from which, desperate, hardened vagabond that I am actually running away. Yes, I must have gypsy blood in me, which will not let me stay in peace in my own land and with my own people. Do not fancy that I did not relish my little recent taste of civilization and respectability, my sitting at good men's tables and hearing bells toll to church. Indeed, and yet again indeed, I relished it hugely, relished it so much that, as I say, there was a moment, a moment of hallucination in which I fancied that the pleasant episode might become an abiding fact, that the tramp had turned citizen. But the hallucination did not endure, though I think that for a time you shared in it. It would never have done, dear sister, even if it had been possible, and it never was possible, never, never, it would never have done. I am not the right kind of man to make a woman happy, such a woman, too. That she will be happy, I hope, trust and believe. In Gerald Aspen she has got a husband who, if he is not quite Fidelia's peer, as what man is very honourable, very honest, very loyal, stable, steadfast, devoted, rich in all qualities that make a woman's married life a happy one. And that Fidelia's life may be a happy one is the dearest prayer that my battered heart can utter. I think you were a little surprised that I waited to see them married. Why not, why not? They are both dear to me, and I helped them both a little, and I like to see a thing through. But after it was over, I did not care to stay much longer in the old country, and that is why, when you thought I was off in Brighton for rest and sea breezes, I was speeding across Europe in the Orient Express. Remember me to all friends. Raven and his wife I may possibly meet somewhere, for I hear that they are going off on a tremendous travel together, all around the world and all over it. Pretty little Lydia ought to enjoy that, for she has something of the roving spirit of her excellent uncle, and Raven makes a capital companion, especially to the woman who happens to be in love with him. I should think that fortune and felicity would improve Raven. I always knew him to be a good fellow at heart, and if he was wild, he came of a wild stock. It would hardly be quite decent for me, would it, to reproach him at all on that score? But a Granton to preach at anyone would scarcely afford edification. As I write, the sun is shining on the Bosporus, and when I look up from my paper, I can see the flags of many nations fluttering in the breeze. The sight of them sets my fancy fluttering too, and I feel that I must be off in a day or two, by sea or by land. I have half a mind to join Bouringer at Marseille, where he is busy organizing an expedition to the South Pole. Whatever I do, or wherever I go, I hope there will always be a kind thought in your dear heart for your very unsatisfactory, incorrigible, but very devoted brother, Rupert Granton. The End. End of Chapter 31. End of Red Diamonds by Justin McCarthy. Read by Carolyn in the summer of 2012 in Oslo, Norway, and Hanover, Germany. Thank you for listening.